So welcome everyone, and it's good to see everybody back here again. Today I'm speaking with Radha Mistry, who is the Foresight Practice Lead at Autodesk. And it's so great to be speaking with you, Radha. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad we're able to do this today.
Yeah, we've been trying to do this for a little while. And during this very strange time that the world is having right now, strange, wonderful, sad, all the emotions mixed together, it gave us the opportunity to finally connect because both you and I stay extremely busy.
Yeah,
So why
absolutely.
don't you, yeah, that's crazy. So I would love for you to just tell everyone who you are and what you do and why I'm excited to talk to you today.
Sure. So my name is Radha Mistry. I run the Foresight practice for a company called Autodesk. I've been kind of operating in the future studies Foresight realm for the better part of a decade now, but at Autodesk, we really focused on the implications of emerging technologies and how that will change the way that we design and make things in the future. And Autodesk is a software company. We make tools for people who design things and make things. And I focus on three core industries: architecture, engineering, construction, media and entertainment, and product design and manufacturing. So we're really just kind of curious about, how people are kind of learning and what the future of work looks like, and how their design and make processes will change over time.
That's pretty amazing. That's a great place to practice foresight from.
Absolutely.
It's a fantastic platform. Before we dive into any more questions, tell me a little bit about that. I mean, I think you guys just stood up your Foresight team formally not that long ago, a year ago or more. And what did you,
Yeah.
how did that happen? And what have you been doing since then?
Yeah, so we officially became the Foresight team last summer, and I can't believe it's already been a year because it's like I just blinked and all of a sudden we're here. When I first came to Autodesk, we had a corporate strategy team, and I kind of realized that a lot of folks were thinking about the future and talking about the future and leveraging a lot of foresight tools and methods, but we didn't really have that formal infrastructure to foresight in a kind of intentional, meaningful way.
Right.
And we have so many incredibly brilliant people in the company. And so I basically went around in discovery mode, as any researcher would do, and said, let me just interview you guys and learn from you. And so it was me and a small group of folks who just went around and asked people, how do you future? What kinds of tools are you guys using? How do you like to think about and talk about the future? And we kind of came away with almost like a series of recommendations to say, hey guys, this is what we think would work really well. And it happened to be just at around the right time where our CTO was saying, hey, we need a team really dedicated to be thinking about this.
Wow.
And so our corporate strategy team kind of rebranded and reorged as our strategic foresight team. And it ended up being that a lot of the ways we were already working, where there was a focus on kind of long-term visioning and strategy, really compelling storytelling, and then nurturing this kind of network of thought leaders, both inside the company and outside, really lended itself super well to kind of being able to build a foresight practice. And so that's where we are. We sit in the CTO organization. We sit adjacent to Autodesk Research and our software architects and our technology centers. And that's really wonderful because we get to kind of think about these far out futures and then really do the hard work of figuring out, well, how do we make these things come true?
Yes.
And that to me is very important, is, who does this impact? Who is it preferable for? And what meaning are we making in the world?
That's an amazing segue because what a great, and by the way, congratulations and what a great,
thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's a good segue for us because I know before we connected, told you I wanted to talk about the future of digital worlds, but not from the tech perspective. So here I am talking to somebody, that's really sort of knows a lot about the tech world, and this would be a great topic, but I want to add a caveat onto that. It's the future of digital worlds in terms of human development. So I know that that's something that you really care about because We can't be talking about technology without talking about, its impact on humanity. And the future is really about humans, right? It's not about tech, it's about humans, how they will make tech, misuse it, use it, ethics, and all that good stuff. So I want to dive right into this idea of digital worlds and digital identities and online embodiment and what all that means and how you've really dealt with that over the last 10 plus years.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about is how do we make sure the future doesn't forget people? And that is just top of mind for me, regardless of where I'm. And actually, my background is in architecture. So the core of my practice didn't start with technology, it started with people. And really thinking about how do we design successfully for human beings. Now, one of the things that's been really interesting is my CEO kind of has this vision that the future will be Ready Player One, and that you will have these like incredibly nuanced, rich virtual environments where people can kind of hop in and out of different segments based on the things they want to learn and the things they want to explore and the types of interactions they seek. And of course, the underlying layer there is the types of interactions they can afford. And one of the things for us as we think about the future of work, and really we're shifting that to really talk about the future of learning, because it's not just about what happens when you get into your career as a worker in society, kind of contributing to the economy. It's what happens when you are learning in middle school or high school. How does that influence your process of how you conceive of the world around you, right? And how you pick up learnings from tools and how you think about the design of objects and artifacts and processes, all the way into what happens when you decide you want a second career, or what happens as the tools start to evolve and technology starts to emerge with new use cases. How can we ensure that our tools support folks every step of the way? And so one of the things we've really been focusing on is the future of work is not the journey of the worker, it's the journey of the learner. And that then expands our scope of vision to say, we really have a responsibility to think about who we are designing these tools for, how we ensure that they are accessible to all. And in a world where it's looking more and more like designers are the folks that have access to the tools and the technology, what are we doing to ensure that more people have more access to that, right? And in a sense of making sure that it's not just one particular region or one particular demographic or a particular socioeconomic standing that gets to decide how we design and make things for people.
Yeah.
And that's just at the core of the way we operate.
Excellent. I mean, that's how we all need to really be thinking about it, right? Because if I say to people all the time that we've done I actually usually use some off-color language here, but I won't do it for this interview. I say we've done a terrible job of bringing people into the future. And we have this small segment that, and even that's messed up, but a small segment that's like, oh, we're in the future. And it's like not the future. It's not really the futures that we all can live in. And so therefore, It's not the futures that we should be having. And so since we've done this terrible job of doing that, we've got a rise of nationalism and we've got all this stuff going on here because we did a terrible job of bringing people into the future. And so they want to go back to the past or something that's comfortable. And I love that you say that. Yes.
Yeah. And one of the things that one of the things that we've been working on with our executive leadership even is let's not just focus on kind of this fetishization of technology, but really what is the position that we're taking, using the STEEP V kind of framework, what is the position we're taking on all of these things that really influence and kind of float along the periphery of technological advancement, right? And so in a world where we do have an impact on this automation discussion and our tools are automating folks out of work and there are environmental impacts to the things that are being put out there, we have to take a position on those things. And so I think that is so important, is to have leadership that's willing to say, look, we know it's not easy and we know it's not going to make everybody happy, but we're going to take a position on it and we're going to move forward in some way.
Yeah.
I think that's super, super important.
It is super important. And how do we do that most effectively? So it's great that to have a Foresight team in that position, right? Because then we can really talk to the ethics and the morals and the values and the social construction around all that stuff. So that's super important. I want to dive in a little bit deeper because I was reading a paper this past week. It was, it's been several years old, but it was really a sociological paper. It wasn't around Foresight, but talking about how years ago sociologists were really approaching the idea of digital worlds, and all that you just talked about with, who's colonizing those worlds and who's, involved in those worlds. And so the sociological perspective about the internet early on was around two different ideas. One, let's attach old sociological theories to this new world that doesn't play by the rules of our old theories. And two, if everybody gets online, it's going to be about disembodiment, which got disproven after a while. But what has more happened is what we might call online embodiment. That I can fix my cell phone filters, or I present myself different ways, or the kids years ago in India who were at the foster homes, but presenting themselves on Facebook as being a banker in New York, not because they were trying to trick people, that's who they wanted to be, and so they were already practicing those identities, and of course it goes a lot deeper than that. So I would love for you to tie some of what you just said about we have that responsibility, and to not fetishize technology, but also to build this world for everybody. And also from the perspective of, we're in this pandemic and we're making this migration in many ways forced upon us, but is this speeding up that digital world and post-citizenship and digital identities and such?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is speeding it. One of the things that my team had noticed was a lot of things that we had projected happening a little bit further down the line have become accelerated, right? And so even things like, will people adopt working in the cloud and working in more kind of collaborative environments? That has become incredibly accelerated out of necessity, not necessarily out of choice. And it's, we've had to have conversations around privacy and trust that we were anticipating having a year from now, maybe 18 months from now.
Wow.
But it happens, right? You kind of have to just deal with it. The thing that I kind of think about is, as we build out these digital worlds, are we ensuring that the language we're using to describe them and the way that we are kind of curating these environments is actually inclusive, and to land well, right? And I say that because sometimes I think when we have conversations around the future, the tools and the methods and the language that we use in itself can sometimes be alienating, where people don't see themselves in that vision of the future. That's right. And as we move towards this digital world that has a lot of great benefits that, can help to kind of democratize education in a lot of ways, and can help to bring access to folks who might not have had access to certain types of experiences, are we ensuring that the tools themselves and the processes themselves aren't alienating to those folks? And then the question that I just think about always is this notion of kind of a digital divide, right? And again, as the tool makers and the process builders, what can we do to ensure that we're not exacerbating that, and that we're actually kind of giving folks the ability to design and make the things that they need, instead of being kind of forced into a box of the capabilities of the tool itself. I was speaking to a friend who's kind of building this amazing settlement in just outside of Delhi, and he's really talking about, we started talking about Revit, and he said, well, we don't use Revit because Revit doesn't have the materials that we use. We use clay, and we're using, indigenous, grasses and things like that. And you can't measure structural integrity in Revit when those material compositions aren't there. That's right. And it was just interesting to me to hear that. I can think about it on a high level, but just to see we can't use your tools because your tools don't serve our needs. Wow. To me it should have been obvious, but it was so profound in that environment. And so as we think about even hyper-local design and build, and as, kind of going back to what you were saying about these trends towards nationalism and populism, where economies are becoming more insular, supply chains are becoming more insular, how will the ways of designing and making become more focused regionally and demographically, to really kind of meet folks' needs? And I know that's not necessarily the virtual world conversation. I'm just kind of, my head's, I think, in a little bit of a different place, so we skewed. But
It's
But that to me is such a critical thing to be thinking about right now.
yeah.
You know.
And actually, I love that you said that because it's super powerful because when we use that word globalization, we're not really talking most of the time about global cooperation, which is great, right? We're talking about the economic globalization forced by, old standards and
Yes.
capitalism and different models. But I think, this idea of being locally resilient and redundant while also being globally cooperative, is super powerful. And I think that's a lot we do.
Absolutely.
And the digital world could help us to do that in many ways, right? It could also hinder that. And it's like, I love to often say to our clients, it's like, we're basically teenagers, young teenagers on a platform that's about, it's a baby platform with teenagers running around amok. And of course, it's a disastrous place. But how can it be, but we can grow up and it can grow up and we can do something better with all of this. And so I love that you brought that idea into it as well.
Well, and the thing I'm also curious about is, the internet came about at a time when our current decision makers, like they're not net natives, right? And even if I think like I learned about the internet when I was at the end of elementary school, middle school, what I'm very curious about is the folks who grew up as digital natives, who grew up with the internet being second nature and that being part of their learning environments. When those groups become decision makers, how will that change the way that we think about like learning and work and the future and digital environments? Because there is right now, like we have so many different generations in that we kind of have to consider make considerations for. But a lot of our decision making still comes from a little bit of that. I don't want to say legacy thinking, but it's from a different way of operating,
yes.
And a different type of business ecosystem. And so I'm curious to see what that shift will be like. And it's going to happen in the next, decade.
Yeah, pretty short, actually. So that's a really powerful point you just made. And it sort of brings me to a question that I didn't prepare you for, but I would like to just talk for maybe a minute or two about the idea of metaphors in a digital world and metaphors for humanity. And so I know you and I both, dive into this idea a lot because we know that metaphors and myths, really drive our futures more than probably some of those, apparent technical kind of, tangible kind of things do. So, in the past, the reason I'm even going here is because in the past we've had all the cloud, these metaphors for the internet, the cloud, the digital highway, the information superhighway, and all this stuff, which you can totally tell is a net immigrant kind of, idea. I wonder what some of those metaphors will be that will help us to make sense of the world of 10, 20 years out from now.
That's so interesting. I haven't really had a chance to kind of think about it, but I feel like there's something towards, I'm seeing a lot more of like the collective and the community, and less of an individualistic kind of approach to things and less about like fast and a little bit more towards like slow. And I wonder how that manifests in these metaphors of the future. I know that, networks are not new and like webs are not new, but there's something about kind of roots, I would say, and kind of this like branching that I'm seeing a lot more with at least the younger generation who have kind of grown up in an environment where digital is normal, and they're kind of almost opting for the opposite.
Oh, I love this. So the reason I got really, my hair stood up on my back of my neck, I don't have any hair and it stood on my neck. Because the more that we're seeing, having a holistic view of the world and regenerative agriculture, regenerative cities, and, that's the big word, another big buzzword right now, which is a good buzzword, regenerative. Then stop looking at the net. And I love this trees and roots and branches, it's like, how do we see all of this as, one larger environment instead of, creating these different environments? Because obviously we've moved into a place on Autodesk and your team is going to be doing more and more of this intentional evolutionary work, right? That's exactly what you're doing. You're doing intentional evolution. How do we get the net and the tree outside my window right now to be part of an ecosystem that's all together, and we don't see this as, so divided from one another.
Absolutely. And I think, not to kind of extend the metaphor more than it needs to be, but like, there is, I think, a shifting of priorities towards things that have to do with environment and climate change. And that's very top of mind for my generation and the generation kind of below me. And I think that story, the visions around that, around how we kind of regenerate our planet and, ensure resilience for ourselves through a vision that doesn't include escaping the planet. Like, how will we, I think a lot of the stories will kind of stem from that, from going back to our roots, learning from the way that the earth operated, and learning from those systems. And you're seeing that a lot in a lot of even just research in emerging technologies. We always go back to nature. We always go back to the environment. And the more that we learn, the more we try to mimic those things. And so it's been, to me, I think we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to take lessons and stories from, just the way that the environment operates and the things that we can do to kind of get it back to where it was before we kind of began to destroy it.
Exactly. I'm so glad we went down that route, because that's such a powerful point you made. And I think that metaphor is something that we might need to explore. Maybe you and I can work on that a little bit together.
Yeah.
If I threw a couple of ideas at you, because I know where I sort of want this to go, and you've given me so much fodder, so great. But if I throw just a couple of ideas at you, I wonder if I could get a sentence or two on each one of them, almost like a fast round here.
Okay.
So in terms of what we've been talking about, if I say post-citizenship to you, what does that mean?
I think that is a world in which human beings aren't bound by their geopolitical citizenship, where, we're talking a little bit more about what maybe ideological zone you identify with, beyond kind of the place you were born into. And I think that's just, I know this is beyond a sentence, but I think that's just, in my generation, a lot of folks, I hear so many people say, well, I was born here, but this is where I call home. Or, I was born with this kind of citizenship, but I don't identify with that country. And I think because we've grown up in an environment where we got to be, some of us, more mobile, those, our citizenship doesn't necessarily relate to our identity. And I think this kind of conversation around citizenship and identity needs to happen in a more profound way than we're kind of tackling right now.
Awesome. And then you said identity. So what about digital identity? What does that mean to you, and where do you think that's going?
I think that I still have a lot of questions around digital identity, because I think we're still learning how to operate as digital citizens. And, there's still not a lot of kind of, in the real world, in physical world, we kind of have social conventions, right? You're not going to just go up to somebody and slap them in the face because they annoyed you in some way. We teach our children not to talk to strangers, right? But as things are kind of emerging, kids are hopping into Ubers, and like, that was something I was told not to do as a child. Don't hop into a stranger's car. So I think we're having to learn, what are the social conventions and the social norms? What is sociology, sociological kind of norms that are required in a digital environment? We don't have that yet. It's too soon. And I think one of the biggest things we have to be talking about in that realm is like, what is the future of trust? Right? And what does that really look like? And how can you design for that in a meaningful way? Because we don't have that right now. And I think it's still very messy. And I've kind of been like thinking about this a lot lately, just given this feeling of maybe not being able to trust the environments that we're in with COVID and things like that. What does the future of trust really look like as we become more prominent in digital environments?
Wow, that was a powerful answer. As a matter of fact, I want you to expound on it just a bit. How do we get that? How do we, you said it's too soon, we don't have the sociology for the internet yet. How do we get there?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know. I would hope that we can see it as a priority to the point where, and I know there are a lot of folks who are already doing this and already kind of giving their lives to this kind of research, dedicating themselves to it. But I do think that we have to first start with the assumption that we don't know anything. And I think the problem right now is a lot of organizations aren't doing that. And so I think it's baseline assumption one is we don't know what we're doing in the digital realm. We don't know enough. Let's learn together. Let's take this as that discovery period where we have to understand that the same social conventions that exist in the physical world do not translate evenly and correlate in the digital environment, in a digital setting. And there are so many different dynamics that we can't even account for right now. So let's do the research, let's do the work, let's make the time to not kind of, just put things out there and see what, but we need to like still test things out, but how do we not just put things out there and then like let them do their thing and then wait until they break and then have to deal with the unintended consequences of them. So I think a little bit more intentionality.
Which is what we use all the time as well, because we've gotten to that place in our, I think it was Jonas Salk who said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, evolution is the process of getting to consciousness, and then consciousness allows us to become the process itself. So once we get there, we become, it's intentional at that point, right? So that's
exactly.
And so the last question I really want to ask you, so because you've been so kind with your time, is to talk a little bit about democratizing the future. So that's another phrase, that's my third and last phrase to you, is we talk a lot about democratizing the future, and that's a loaded phrase in itself, but in a good way, in a positive way. What do you think that means, and how can we really democratize the future? And of course we talked about digital environments today, but we can sort of switch from that to our what we might call the physical world, but how do we democratize the future? And why do you think that's important?
I mean, I think it's important because I think people need to see themselves in the future, right? And like the more people that can talk about it, that can understand it, that feel like they are included in the language we use to talk about the future, the better the future becomes. Because they can opt into this discussion around, well, who is this preferable for? And I think the day that we become successful is the day that we can say that someone has felt that they have a sense of agency and empowerment enough to say, hey, look, I'm not included in that. This is what I need, and making space for those kinds of conversations. So I think like UNESCO's Futures Literacy Initiative does this a lot, where they talk about ensuring that folks have kind of what I call like foresight fluency, but the ability to kind of think and make and do about the future. And so I think it's not necessarily, making everyone feel like they have to design the future or conceive of the future, but where they feel like they can engage in the conversation about it and they feel like they can see themselves in it. And I think that's where it becomes incredibly important to kind of have that democratization of futures thinking.
That was also a fantastic and powerful answer. Thank you. And it was great for you to throw in the futures literacy piece, and we'll see if we can get Rial to take a look at the video.
Oh yeah, he's great. Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I was just doing an interview with Peter Hayward on the Future podcast, and we got to talk about it a little bit. And of course, that I'm a big geek about complexity and futures literacy and anticipation, and the one step beyond that, even foresight being a cooperative evolutionary trait for humanity. So, and I think a lot of what you've talked about today and been kind to share with us really gives sort of bones to that, or flesh on the bones, or a scaffold to that a good bit, because we're talking a lot about how we really get there. And I love, one of the most important things I thought we talked about today is how do we get there? And I love your insights to that. I really appreciate your work in the field. I think it's so important and powerful. That's why I wanted to talk to you today, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for that, Radha.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed this conversation. It's always wonderful to chat with you.
Yep, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.